welcome to Georgia Tech's live panel session on demystifying ransomware and defending against future attacks, being put on as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I'm Brendan Kurbis, a research scientist within the School of Public Policy at Georgia Tech and instructor in the online Master of Science in Cybersecurity program. I am excited to have the opportunity to moderate today's discussion. We've brought together both policy and technical expertise to discuss the response to ransomware at the organizational, national, and international levels. With that, it's a great pleasure to introduce our panelists of thought leaders today. Our first panelist, Milton Mueller, is a professor in Georgia Tech School of Public Policy and serves as the program director for the policy track of the online Master of Science in Cybersecurity program. Milton is an internationally prominent scholar who's been captivated by the field of cybersecurity for decades. The author of several books and scores of journal articles, his research specializes in the political economy of information and communication. He is also the co-founder and director and partner with myself of the Internet Governance Project, a policy analysis center for global internet governance. Our next panelist is Nadia Kostyuk, assistant professor in Georgia Tech School of Public Policy. Nadia's research focuses on security studies, modern warfare, cyber conflict, cyber institutions and capability, as well as Russian and Eurasian politics. Nadia is a co-organizer of the Digital Issues Discussion Group, an online workshop series designed to encourage innovation on issues related to global integration of information technologies. And she is also a current fellow at the East-West Institute's Initiative for Global Cooperation in Cyberspace. Our next guest is Trevor Lewis, research scientist and penetration tester for the Georgia Tech Research Institute, as well as an instructor for Georgia Tech Professional Education. Trevor brings a wealth of experience over 15 years in cybersecurity with specializations in pen testing, red teaming, adversary emulation, architecting SOCs, defensive cyber operations, and enterprise networking. In addition to several industry certifications, he is a PhD student at Dakota State University in the Cyber Operations Program and NSA Designated Center for Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense, Cyber Operations, and Cyber Research. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Joseph Yeager, assistant professor in the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy at Georgia Tech. Joseph joins us recently at Georgia Tech from a postdoc appointment at the University of Washington. His research interests span a wide range of topics across cryptography and include fundamental contributions to both applied and theoretical problems. His work in the crypto space has earned accolades, having recently received a Best Paper by Early Career Researchers Award at Crypto 2020. So welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here. So a small bit of housekeeping before we get started with the panel. I want to remind the audience that we've scheduled time for Q&A after the panelists wrap up. So I invite you to post your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, at some point during the discussion, we will launch a poll to get a sense of the room, and I encourage you to participate in that. So let's get started. I'm going to start with Milton. So in July of this year, Milton, the Cyber Incident Notification Act introduced in the U.S. Congress and would require federal entities and their contractors, as well as critical infrastructure operators, to disclose cybersecurity breaches to the Department of Homeland Security if it was passed. A recent companion proposal, the Ransom Disclosure Act, would also require U.S. companies specifically impacted by ransomware attacks to report payments to hackers within 48 hours. The DHS would then receive data on ransomware payments, including the amount of money demanded and paid and the type of currency used. Can you talk a little more about these proposals and what the expected outcomes are if they pass? And what other policy measures could potentially protect against a new ransomware attacks and threats?
Yes, it's part of a long-standing Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the latest in a longstanding effort by the national government, the federal government, to play a bigger role in cybersecurity. But I'm afraid that a lot of these efforts are more about sort of appearing to do something than they are about creating actually better defenses. Um, there's been a long history of laws related to information sharing and information reporting. Starting back in 2012, we started debating what is now the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, and that created an automatic indicator initiative, the AIS, in which companies were supposed to report indicators of compromise to the federal government, and then it would be into a centralized database, and that would be distributed. And that program was really quite a failure in the sense that very few people participated in it, and the information that people got out of it was not all that helpful. And the initiative seemed to ignore the fact, as do the current one, that there are already various forms of information sharing and reporting mechanisms out there. And so I'm concerned a bit about adding sort of an additional layer of bureaucracy onto the burdens that companies already face in terms of their cybersecurity problems. Now, one good thing about it is that it's limited only to federal agencies, contractors, and critical infrastructure, although the definition of critical infrastructure can be a bit expansive at times. And it might be helpful to have more consistent statistics about who's getting hit by ransomware and what exactly the demands are, although I don't see any problem with that kind of information being supplied voluntarily or detected by cybersecurity companies that are collecting this information. So the concern is, we already have 50 different state data breach notification laws, and you add a federal level onto that. One of the big issues that we've been debating for the last 5 to 10 years or so is whether the federal government should actually have a federal data breach notification law that supersedes the state so that we don't have so much duplication. And every state has a different set of criteria for what you have to report and how you have to report. So it would be nice to consolidate that and have a lot more consistent, unified source of information about what's happening. But I'm not sure about the wisdom of adding another layer onto that.
Great, thank you. If any of the panelists want to chime in, we're going to try and keep everyone to 5 minutes, but if you've got a quick comment that you want to pick up on really quick, feel free. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that, Milton. So let's move on. Let's go to Nadia. We just talked a little bit about the domestic legislative process here in the U.S. But Nadia, you've done work looking at deterrence in cyberspace and specifically examining the role of public versus private capacity and how what you call cyber weak and cyber strong entities might overallocate resources in public cyber institutions to discourage would-be attackers. So in addition to the legislation discussed by Milton, there's been a flurry of activity addressing ransomware by the executive branch of the U.S. government in the last several months. Notably, a Department of Justice ransomware and digital extortion task force was launched to coordinate response efforts. There was revised Department of Treasury OFAC guidance to victims paying ransoms and sanctions targeting key financial intermediaries. There was a White House meeting involving 30 like-minded governments. There was FinCEN reporting recently on ransoms paid. And most recently, there's alleged coordinated action between LEA's law enforcement agencies, U.S. Cyber Command, and allies to take down adversary infrastructure. Can you speak to the international implications of these U.S. policies and other activities and how they compare or relate to cyber deterrence investments of other countries?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's a lot of stuff to fit. I'll try to hit a little bit
Yeah.
on each of the initiatives. So the publication you're referring to explains how the countries can invest in their cyber capabilities to deter strategic cyber attacks. And I define those attacks as those causing detrimental damage to countries' economy and prosperity. So ransomware, we've seen its impact over the last year can definitely meet that criterion. And so in that publication, I argue that in order for deterrence to work, we need to change the attacker's cost-benefit calculation, which is pretty simple argument. And this is what the U.S. government has been doing. So the initiatives you mentioned, they could be sort of grouped into three broad areas, right? So the first one, it's focusing on closing the loopholes and making difficult for criminals to launder their profits. And particularly what was sort of important, prominent in this regard is that the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control designated SUETS, a virtual cryptocurrency exchange, as one of the entities added to the sanctioning list. And this is very important because this is the first time when the virtual cryptocurrency exchange has been added to this list. Of course, how effective it is, we still need to see because we wanted to see how the cyber criminals will respond, right? How creative they will come with coming potential other tools to get their profits. But I think it's a very good first step. And as you mentioned, U.S. has been a leader in this regard, but also the United Kingdom has been also very active in figuring out ways to make the transfer from cryptocurrency to cash more difficult for criminals. Second, you mentioned the Biden administration's efforts to work with the international community. And specifically, I believe like 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, they had this called Counter Ransomware Initiative led by the White House with 30 like-minded states. And I'm kind of like a little bit skeptical in that regard, similar to what Milton mentioned about the domestic initiative. I think the discussion was not very new, and the challenges that they brought up were not new not new and specific to ransomware, but to cyber attacks in general, cyber threats in general. And this discussion has been happening for the last 10, 15 years. Specifically, they look at the four main areas. So first one was development of cyber norms. Second one, I believe, was building better resilience. Then also was a discussion about how to counter illicit uses of cryptocurrency and also disruption ransomware infrastructure and actors. So again, the main problem is that a lot of countries around the world, right, the leaders in this discussion are India, Germany, UK, and Australia, but all the rest of the countries involved, they don't have the capabilities, right? So even in order for them to be meaningful participants in this regard, there should be some investment to help these countries to be sort of on the same level, right? To help them build capacity for better law enforcement cooperation, for virtual currency tracing, which will take significant time. But again, it's a sort of an important first step. We'll see how it's going to play out. And of course, the question of cyber norms or any norms in general takes a significant time. So we'll see if something can happen in that regard. And lastly, you mentioned, which is sort of similar to what Milton has touched a little bit, is about the topic of mandatory reporting, which is not unique for the United States, but also, again, countries follow the US lead. We've seen some developments in the UK, Australia, other nations that have been talking about this. The requirements, of course, are very different, but the main sort of approach is to put a burden on the victim to report what has happened. And so I argue there is, despite all the benefits of this approach, there potential is some flaws in the sense that it can change in the change of tactics by the attacker. And of course, as a result, the victim can suffer more, and the customers of the victim company, can suffer more by extension. So to give you just a few examples how the attacker can change the tactics, is that attackers could be more likely to exfiltrate data, not necessarily for the ransom payment, but as an enforcement mechanism in returns for the organization's silence on this particular issue. Right, so the victim will be facing the following dilemma: pay ransom, between paying ransom and going to the police, but having sensitive data release, or paying ransom, going to the police, or having a sensitive data release and keeping silent. Additionally, attacker can also raise an average ransomware, right? So basically, if he will realize that in the countries where the risk for being caught is much higher because of the mandatory reporting, attackers might decide to hack not small businesses, but the large companies. And we've seen this change of tactics during the Rebel ransom report by the studies that was published by Elliptic. Particularly, they demonstrated that during the negotiation time, the rebel placed 10% surcharge because the victim requested to pay not in Bitcoin, but Monero. And this is the currency that is less traceable. Again, I think all of these initiatives are great. How effective they are, we will need to see. But so far, I'm a little bit skeptical because there's not a lot of new information. Is a lot of the challenges and a lot of the information that has been used to address cyber threats in general, which hasn't been working that effectively yet.
Great. Wow. Thank you for that wealth of information, Nadia, and particularly the kind of perspective outside of the United States. It's very easy to get swamped in news about efforts happening within the U.S., particularly for people based here. But there definitely are efforts occurring elsewhere. For instance, Australia, you mentioned, they have a similar ransom payment disclosure law being considered right now, which I encourage people to go out and look at, because it does raise an interesting point about the purpose of collecting that data. Because as a scientist, one wants a clear kind of dependent variable, right? And we want to know if our policy interventions, wherever they may be occurring, are having some sort of impact. So for me, at least in the Australian legislation, that rationale is pretty clear. Whether or not, I mean, that's just one country collecting one set of data, and ransomware is a transnational issue. So interesting comments. Thanks again.
Can I add a two-finger on that point?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the main challenge, and I didn't mention it here because I obviously have very little few minutes, but I think it's the reporting biases as with any study, right? Who will be reporting? If the company is huge and can pay ransomware, they're less likely to report because they're afraid of the leaked information, being leaked in the small country, right? So there's so many biases, information selection biases, and who reports when and why. So of course, it's important to collect this data, but it's also, countries should be very careful in for what purposes they use information, especially if they're trying to make policy recommendations. They should sort of account for all these sources of biases in your data. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great follow-up. Anyone else want to jump in real quick? No? Okay, if not, we'll move on. We're right on time. So Trevor, we've heard about possible policy responses and implications at the national and international levels. But as the first line of defense, often with the strongest incentives to defend against cybersecurity threats, what about the organizational level? Can you explain how organizations can increase their security to reduce the risk of ransomware incidents? And what measures at various levels within organizational networks and systems can prevent ransomware from spreading? I think you're muted. There we go. I think you're good to
How
go.
about now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, so for context for everyone, my job at GTRI as a penetration tester, we perform a lot of security assessments on different types of systems across many different industries. So this kind of allows us to get a unique viewpoint of the different types of vulnerabilities that exist in real world environments. And along the line of the ransomware topic, a lot of ransomware these days is taking advantage of the same types of vulnerabilities that we do during our penetration testing engagements. Much of the time, these vulnerabilities, that single entry point into a system ends up being an actual, software vulnerability, an actual documented vulnerability that has a CVE number attached to it that may show up in a vulnerability scan or threat intelligence reports from CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency. But sometimes the vulnerabilities or what allows ransomware to spread and enter into an environment aren't what you would expect. They end up being just a small misconfiguration where that misconfiguration in an environment in and of itself does not decrease an organization's security. But when you put that together with other misconfigurations and you look at the system as a whole, that allows the attack to proceed and allows ransomware to propagate effectively. Big example right now going on is the Black Matter ransomware that's been affecting a lot of organizations since July. CISA came out with a notification recently to talk about the various tactics and techniques that particular variant uses and what organizations can do to prevent that from spreading. That particular variant of ransomware takes advantage of a lot of circumstances that we do during our engagements, establishing initial foothold inside of a network, privilege escalation, scraping credentials out of memory, and then moving laterally across the network and effectively propagating to other systems. So the answer to the defensive question there is more, you've really got to look at the entire path that the ransomware takes to enter into an environment. And that's really what makes it challenging for many organizations to prevent this entirely, because there's so many layers from the outside of the network all the way down to the endpoint, and especially in complex enterprise environments. So you kind of have to look at it from a top-down approach. Your typical defenses from the perimeter all the way down to the endpoint, and the various vectors that that ransomware may enter. A lot of times, ransomware is chained alongside of other malware. Malware gets into an environment and it's just a second or third stage additional installation package. Once you get that initial foothold for whatever it is, whether it's spear phishing and actually exploiting a piece of software, a browser plugin, or a local, malicious document or something like that. Once you get into a system, everything comes into play, and it's the same exact attack lifecycle that we use. So for defenses, through email, you need solid email and spam filtering. You need user awareness training for phishing, for users to be able to identify phishing. You need email attachment detonation, defensive tools for web browsing, your typical next generation firewalls, intrusion prevention systems. But you also need to go to the lengths of breaking and inspecting SSL and TLS. That's a huge problem right now with basic network defense, being able to identify malicious stuff inside of encrypted channels. Then you need, take it further down into the environment. Let's assume your perimeter protections fail. You need some internal mitigations as well, some network traffic sensors, some taps. You need to be able to get that network traffic, inspect it, and look at, those SMB protocols, for the Black Matter ransomware right now. Lateral movement is using a lot of Windows SMB, server message block, across the network and accessing admin file shares. Your typical sysadmin related channels for managing Windows endpoints. Attackers are taking advantage of that. And then feeding that network data up to a centralized location, either to a SOC or some kind of entity that can really kind of aggregate and put those circumstances together for defensive purposes. And then all the way down to the last piece that I'll say that really kind of helps organizations is privileged access management. A lot of attacks, a lot of these ransomware campaigns take advantage of the fact that privileges are not separated. They're often collapsed into various permissions hierarchies that may benefit an organization. They may help, the business unit or the business purpose, but they end up allowing an attacker to really take advantage of it if they were able to get into that position. So, and then maintaining where credentials get left behind on systems, having a solid idea of where admin accounts can log into lower level trusted systems, things like that, because all of those circumstances play into that equation of once you've actually gained control of an initial endpoint, how do you actually take it the next step from an attacker perspective? That's really what kind of fuels the fire in these situations. And really allows ransomware campaigns to continue across, many different organizations in the industry.
Great. Thank you so much, Trevor. So yeah, it sounds like while ransomware has certain characteristics, there are a lot of commonalities with other malware threats and network protections and other types of controls that need to be put in place. So great. All right. So let's see, Joseph. Let's go ahead and move on. Joseph, a recent Virus Total report looked at the global ransomware threat picture and explored, among other things, similarities in ransomware samples over time. And just yesterday, we saw reporting on how a vulnerability in a threat actor's ransomware was exploited by a private actor to decrypt files. Both are suggestive to me that if vulnerabilities in observed ransomware samples could be identified and leveraged by defenders, many victims might potentially benefit. Is it possible to develop a cryptography tool that could break through a ransomware attack and recover valuable data? And what would that look like? And I believe you're muted.
How about
Great.
now?
You're perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. So, I guess I'll kind of in my answer try to express kind of all the nuance that kind of happened in this question where, so you mentioned these similarities that we see in ransomware over time, and this provides us both positive and negative news with respect to being able to kind of break it with cryptography to recover the victim's information. So maybe I'll start with some positives, then talk about negatives, and then get back to the positives at the end. So, the positive is kind of what you would expect. That if there's lots of similar ransomware being kind of deployed against lots of different systems, and you manage to break this particular strain of ransomware's cryptography, then you can use it to recover the information across all these systems. But kind of first negative here is, I guess, to touch back on something that Nadia mentioned, that often ransomware actors now are kind of taking this dual approach of both encrypting your information and making you pay to get the information back, as well as threatening to reveal the information that they exfiltrate while doing this. And using cryptography to recover your information solves one of these two problems. So there's still the issue of them revealing their information. And then at a kind of more systematic level, we also have to kind of think about how the system works as a whole. So, I guess just to make sure that kind of everyone's on the same page, cryptography doesn't work the way you see it in fiction on like TV or movies, where they kind of our plucky heroes find some encrypted information of the bad guys and they need to get into it, so they give it to the technical person who kind of bangs away at their computer for a while, and then at a narratively appropriate time uncovers what's inside the encrypted information. Cryptography, which is really wonderful for us over the last 50 years, has become quite strong. So if you use modern, well-vetted cryptography and you deploy it correctly, then people aren't going to be able to kind of break the cryptography and see what's underneath. And so because of this, part of the downside of the fact that we see all this similar malware being deployed is that the reason we see these similarities across malware is that to some extent, malware deployment and ransomware in particular is being kind of professionalized, where these ransomware gangs are providing ransomware as a service to other criminals. And as you might expect with this kind of professionalization, as they do it, people who specialize on ransomware are going to be better and better at kind of deploying their cryptography correctly. So when they deploy it correctly, we have issues here. But at least currently, there have been a number of instances where ransomware deployers do make kind of catastrophic mistakes in their deployment of cryptography, which allows the recovery of the underlying information. A couple of different examples here. There's been times where they kind of use their random number generation incorrectly while producing their encryption keys. Say producing the key as some sort of hash on the current timestamp. Well, if you do that, then I can just brute force go through all the possible timestamps and check all the keys and recover the key that was used to encrypt. There was another example where the ransomware deployers kind of intentionally gave decryption capabilities to a subset of the people they had exploited, and then some kind of technical organizations, together with law enforcement efforts, based on this action, were able to notice that the keys were being generated in a poor way, where again, we could then use that to decrypt. And there have also been some kind of a variety of other ways that ransomware deployers make mistakes that we can exploit, such as using keys which are far too small, so we can actually just recover the decryption key by applying an algorithm to the encryption key. So yeah, that kind of touches on a number of topics, how kind of the similarities between ransomware gives us both positive and negative for recovering information. I believe you're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you. Joseph, I want to pick up on one of the points that you mentioned. You mentioned cryptography solves only one of the two problems that we're seeing right now with ransomware. The one problem that it apparently doesn't solve is the exfiltration and publication of data, potentially. But cryptography could, in theory, if we're practicing if we've implemented all the best practices that Trevor mentioned earlier, could protect data at rest, right? An organization's data at rest. Is there any merit to that idea?
Yeah, so that's a fair point. So when I was talking about that, I was thinking from the kind of cryptographic attack against their encryption. But indeed, as kind of one of the layers across the many different layers that Trevor was talking about, cryptography kind of plays a role in securing your information. And from that perspective, right, we can kind of help to stop the infiltration from happening in the first place.
Great, thank you. Okay, so does anyone else want to jump in, ask Joseph a question?
I actually had something I wanted to bring up too.
Yeah, please.
I don't know if Nadia or Milton wants to discuss it, but in the discussions of these different companies trying to get together different policies to help against ransomware, I think it's noticeable that kind of the companies, the countries from which we think most of the ransomware is coming are different from the countries trying to deploy these policies. And maybe they could say something about kind of what sort of difficulties these bring up with regards to the policies being effective.
So
Well,
go ahead. I'll go after.
I think the thing to underscore about these laws is that they're fundamentally about notification and collecting statistics. They don't really do anything to identify a particular adversary or to protect against those adversaries. They're simply about reporting requirements. And I think a lot of people are kind of laboring under the assumption that if the federal government takes more responsibility for protecting us, that we're going to be better off against nation-state attackers. And I think that's probably not right. I think that the government is, number one, the government has to get its own house in order and protect its own agencies, which it hasn't done a very good job of doing. And when you come to these federal agencies, they're pretty much just like any other organization when it comes to basic cybersecurity practices. Maybe, with the military or the national intelligence agencies, you have more resources and certainly higher stakes. But the practices and the procedures that Trevor talked about and the analyses, they're pretty much the same at the organizational level across the board. So, if the government can't protect its own organizations, it's unlikely that they're going to be in a position protect a bunch of other organizations, the hundreds of thousands of different entities that might be threatened. And some people might say that deterrence of some kind of military type deterrence might work, and I'll turn that over to Nadia because that's kind of more her area.
Thank you, Milton. Yeah, so I was very excited about this dialogue, right, that I mentioned, counter ransomware initiative that took place 2 weeks ago. But then when I read of the transcript of the Q&A with the person who led it, Deputy National Security Advisor and Neuenberger, there was one journalist from Russia, actually, right? And he said, this is all great. You have all these countries. Obviously, the problem that a lot of these countries, they don't have the capability to address this threat itself, right? Something that I brought up during my comments. But the second issue is, why don't we have Russia, right? Since we know it's the source of the threat. And so she said that with Russia, her answer was very interesting, right? She said, with Russia, we already have a bilateral dialogue and we had very open and candid discussion. And I mean, it's true. We know that Biden talked to Putin during the Geneva summit, and there has been some bilateral conversations happening. How effective they are is remaining to be a question. Even though we see some decline of ransomware during the summer. But anyways, but she said now the main goal is to work with all these other countries and get them on the same level, right? Again, obviously it's a very diplomatic response, but one sort of comparison that I'd like to make is that at least when the countries started fighting terrorism, right, the countries who were known to be sources of the terrorism, at least they were invited to the discussion. In this case, Russia wasn't sitting at the table. So I think it's not very effective not to invite Russia, but at the same time, we all, as a government, and so it's all a part of foreign policy and diplomacy. So it's all, part of the game.
Certainly, yeah. Okay, well, so we've talked a little more about the government response or government's response, possible responses. We're getting a couple questions in the Q&A from audience members to talk a little more about at the organizational level. So there's one, can you speak to vulnerabilities associated with system administrators as their points, as they are points of penetration, and how to better defend and protect this community? I think this is kind of alluding to some sysadmins being lured into ransomware incidents. Trevor, did you?
Yep, I can take that. Do I sound good? Make sure I got the mute.
You got it
out. Yeah, so sysadmins are definitely a target because their accounts by nature in organizations are super high privileges that can, if an attacker got control of those credentials, they can take over an entire environment. So really that comes down to the best way to to protect that is kind of similar to what I was talking about with privilege access management and separating privileges. Going back to the very basic concepts of separation of privileges, but to an extreme level. Understanding the system as a whole, understanding your permissions hierarchy. If your environment is Active Directory focused, or all your accounts and authentication, authorization, accounting, everything is based off of Active Directory. Building that in such a way that the highest privilege credentials are protected in the event that they get compromised. And so usually in practice, that comes down to creating multiple accounts for different types of administrative functionality, making sure that those accounts can only log into certain locations. And it's really creating this. You've got the concept of defense in depth and layered approaches to security, but you do this in privileged access management as well. You have your low privileged user accounts. Those are the most untrusted, effectively. If an attacker got control of them, you don't want them to be able to do anything else on an adjacent system or an adjacent level of trust, whatever that is, building these layers of trusts in organizational hierarchies. Certainly, Active Directory, your primary authorization mechanism, authentication and authorization mechanism, that is something that needs to be protected. The administrative accounts that access that and control that need to be protected. They should only be able to log into certain places. You should have two-factor authentication to these accounts wherever possible. So again, like I mentioned in answering my question, it was. You kind of have to take this layered approach and implement just as much as you possibly can to protect sysadmins. And of course, user awareness training that goes, especially for sysadmins. And I say that because, 100 years ago, I was a sysadmin. I knew nothing about cybersecurity. And then I got to the point that I am today. And I, reflect back and think, wow, there were so many opportunities where my account could have gotten compromised. And it didn't by luck, So now we we push that heavily and try and educate sysadmins, and we've actually got a class, a GTPE class, security-focused system administration, where we kind of look at permissions hierarchies and Active Directory, focus on where we can abuse things, things like that, and how to protect those credentials. We've got a public class coming up in a couple months, so. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you, Trevor. There's another interesting question here. Maybe some of the technical folks here can pick up on this. Do ransomware authors rely, talking about kind of the evolution of a couple of years, do ransomware authors rely on fileless malware often? That is, to avoid the possibility of defenders acquiring a sample of their malware that can be analyzed for vulnerabilities.
I guess I'll talk first, and maybe Trevor has more specific knowledge, but so I don't specifically know of any use of this by ransomware authors, but kind of as I guess Trevor also touched on, often the ransomware kind of piggybacks on some other sort of malware. So I'm sure they're open to using all of the kind of techniques within malware more broadly, and then the ransomware acts as their kind of way to monetize things.
Yeah, so from my perspective, the techniques that I've seen, and certainly I don't keep track of all variants of malware, all variants of ransomware, but PowerShell for the past 5 or 10 years has been a big fileless vector Windows systems because it executes in memory, and we've also seen over the past 5 to 10 years this kind of shift between endpoint detection and response capabilities. A long time ago, they didn't have the ability to see into memory. So PowerShell was a big vector for anything, for any kind of malware, just because endpoint detection and response capabilities couldn't detect that in memory. Now we've shifted to there are a fair amount of companies that can actually detect that sort of stuff, but there's still companies that don't, and there's still a lot of organizations that are trying to make that transition. So I would say PowerShell is still, and not just PowerShell, other types of scripting languages in Windows. That's definitely fair game, because once you can get your PowerShell code to execute, you can then either download directly into memory, and you can load PE32 files. You can load Windows executables in memory dynamically. So there's a lot of techniques that kind of chain off of each other that make it fileless. But I wouldn't say that prevents organizations like CISA or any kind of third party from analyzing it, analyzing the samples. A lot of times nowadays their analysis involves basically becoming the victim and reverse engineering every component, every step along the way. And they may get down into the debugger level, the memory level, and actually look at what API calls the specific PowerShell code is calling. It's all fair game nowadays in all those different techniques. So yeah,
Good.
sometimes they use it, sometimes they don't.
Okay. All right. There we go. So let's see. So maybe we could shift a little more to the policy, public policy issues. So cybersecurity insurance is role in ransomware attacks has been a hot topic. Could anyone speculate on the future state of cybersecurity insurance and how companies and small and local governments, entities reliant on this safeguard might be impacted by any shifts, I guess, in the policy space? So would reporting impact potentially the use of cybersecurity insurance?
Yeah, I would say that the only impact that either of these two laws would have on insurance would be possibly, a better actuarial database, if indeed we did get all of the reports that we would like to get from this. Taking note of what Nadia said about sort of mixed incentives of some people to report or not to report. I think it wouldn't have a big impact other than that very speculative possible impact. Insurance is fundamentally about sort of trying to use the cost of buying insurance as an incentive to adopt better practices. So the insurance companies have to be able to sort of identify what those practices are. And one of the reasons cybersecurity is so hard from an insurance standpoint is that the environment, the software ecosystem is so dynamic, it's changing so frequently that it's very hard to get some kind of stable set of probabilities that you can use and say, oh, if you do this, or your risks will be lower, because there's so much more focused and directed changes in the software ecosystem and a cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders that it's really hard to define those probabilities, as opposed to life insurance, where you sort of know what the probability is when you die and how old you are going to be when you die. Cyber attacks are just not quite in that space yet.
All right. On that note, I did want to mention, even cyber insurers are looking to aggregate data around ransomware incidents. I mean, as we've mentioned earlier, there are information sharing efforts in that sector to help to address the specific problem. Some of the largest cyber insurers out there. And we'll see where that goes and how it plays vis-a-vis these national calls for incident data.
Yeah, I wonder whether the assumption behind that law is that there are a lot of incidents that are not being reported, or that we, somehow cannot rely on people to report, or I wonder whether anybody on the panel understands better than I do what the rationale for this law was.
You're speaking to the Ransom Disclosure Act?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding, and probably you know better than me, my understanding is that to just collect information and also like report a particular event so they can prevent this ransomware tool being used in other instances, right? So they not only want to have the information about some of the details of when it happened, what was requested, but also you try to speculate who was behind it, what currency was used. So they're trying to sort of shut it down and make it sure that it's not going to be used anywhere else. But the question is, like, I don't know how feasible it is and whether it's possible, right? Because even though FBI was very successful in recovering part of the ransomware for the Colonial Pipeline, we know that over the summer the Casilla ransomware attack, right, took place, and FBI was holding the decryption key for three weeks, even though it was trying to catch the perpetrator, but it was not very successful in that regard. So it sort of sends like a mixed signal in terms of your question, like what are they trying to achieve and whether they will be successful to achieve, and if you report within 24, 48, and 72 hours. Plus, I think that there was a letter from the tech community saying that the 24 hours is not realistic for them, because if they're going to rush to report, they're going to misreport a lot of the stuff, because they will prioritize reporting over dealing with the issue.
Any follow-ups on that?
Or maybe to touch on the insurance more. I've heard some people worry that kind of if insurance against ransomware proliferates, that in some sense this will be kind of making ransomware more economically beneficial for criminals and kind of thereby encouraging more criminals to take part in it. I don't know, does anyone have a stance on that? Or?
That's what I go. Sorry, Milton. I'll mention that I responded to this in the chat, so I don't want to repeat what I wrote, but that's exactly what I wrote. We should change the incentive, because otherwise there's no point. Yeah, it becomes more profitable for them to do it, and also there's no incentive for the victim, not just to pay the ransomware because it's being covered.
That's just called moral hazard. That's a well-known concept in economics, where you, by insuring against something, you increase the possibility that it would happen. I think that's not a big problem, in the sense that, first of all, ransomware is extremely annoying and disabling, whether you get the ransom back or not. So it's going to be a big crisis for these companies, and it's going to be an operational cost and so on. So nobody's going to just say, we don't care if we have ransomware. But yes, indeed, if indeed the payment is covered, and there's a policy debate about whether we should ban ransom payments as well. And that's an interesting one that you can make cases on either side of it. But even if you ban payment of the ransom, some people are going to pay it when they're desperate.
So to add on that, what I was suggesting is, instead of having this, insurance for paying ransom, we switch sort of the incentive for the victim, right? And we will cover, let's say, data recovery. And in that way, it will help to build sort of better resiliency of the process, potentially preventing repeated attacks. So long term, of course, it's more beneficial. Of course, it requires time and effort to make this change possible. I don't know if it's possible, but again, when we think about deterrence, in a sense, right, it's all about cost-benefit calculation, changing the incentives for the victim to report, to implement these changes, to make it more beneficial and less costly than to pay ransomware and worry about the leaked data.
But that's a good point. If the insurance companies could say, we will pay your costs, but only if you have certain backup systems in place that minimize the problems, otherwise you're not getting a payment, then that would be this kind of alignment of incentives that we want insurance to achieve, which is, pushing people to be more secure so the insurance companies make fewer payouts and everybody's happier.
Of course, presumably, if we're seeing growth in ransomware incidents, and along with possible payouts, I mean, there are incentives for the insurers, right, to pursue those efforts to help secure their customers' networks before they even get hit by ransomware. So, yeah, there's strong kind of practical and as well as moral limitations to kind of outright bans on insurance, and it's a complex incentive structure on both sides. All right.
And the incentives of cats to intrude on video.
Cyber cats.
It'd be nice to say hi.
He's a cryptographer. He's providing strong cryptography for this meeting.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up the Q&A there. Got a couple closing remarks. We're almost at the top of the hour. Thank you all for joining us today for this insightful and timely discussion on demystifying ransomware and defending against future attacks. And thank you to the panelists for sharing their expertise and experience in this subject matter. It's been very helpful. And now a little pitch for cybersecurity at Georgia Tech. It's one of the fastest growing fields in the tech sector. I think everyone would agree on that, requiring both technical expertise and a broad range of multidisciplinary knowledge. As such, Georgia Tech approaches our cybersecurity training collaboratively, and we partner with the leading researchers and scientists from the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy and elsewhere in the university and Georgia Tech Research Institute to build long-term cybersecurity proficiency at the organizational, national, and international level. To learn more about our cybersecurity short courses, our cybersecurity certificate, our online cybersecurity master's program, please visit pe.gatech.edu/cyber-live. They'll be putting the link in the chat, I believe. We'd also love to keep in touch with everyone who's attended today, so please follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You can get us on Twitter at GTOMSCyber. And thanks to everyone, and enjoy the remainder of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Thank you.